All right, so we're immediately following lunch, Troy, so we gotta pump up the crowd. Luckily, we have a lot to talk about.
Lots.
Thanks for being here, by the way.
Thanks for having me.
This has been kind of an exciting little period for you. I know you just wrapped Shark Tank, which you're now a judge on for the first time.
Yes.
Was that, I mean, you live in LA. We should probably tell a few people who need a little bit of a refresher what exactly, besides being a television judge, you do all day.
It depends, the core, Atom Factory, the core of our company is a talent representation company in the music space. And then we also have a technology fund, which called Cross Culture, where we've invested in startups like Uber, Dropbox, Spotify, Lyft, Warby Parker.
So a few companies
Slack.
that haven't proven themselves much yet, but you're really feeling optimistic.
Some good companies.
So being down in LA and having such a hand in the music industry, I wonder how much it is related when you're choosing an artist to represent, for example. Meghan Trainor, I know that you represent her. If you sort of see something that's special about somebody, I see the potential here. This is somebody who's really going to be a star. Do you approach possibly giving money to a startup at all the same way?
I think there are similarities. The music business is a hit-driven business, and tech's a hit-driven business.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately you're looking for whether it's a product or a song that you feel like is a hit, and then but underneath that is a founder, a great founder or a great artist.
Right.
And in terms of characteristics, you're looking for in a founder. That founder's that's gonna drive a Mack truck through a cul-de-sac to get their idea, executed on, and that artist that's willing to, work 20 hours a day and do the promo, make the runs, and put the work in.
There are so many artists, musicians, that you have maybe a number one hit, and that's a big deal. And sometimes it doesn't go any farther than that, and that's still something that's a huge achievement. I think when you look at a startup who has an app that gets really popular and then kind of dies out and maybe there's not a round two, that can be seen as a failure. It seems like we don't give founders necessarily much of a chance to have that next success if the first one isn't the next Facebook.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. You look at Travis, and he's running a $52 billion company right now.
Well, yes.
And and
he's done quite well.
Yeah, and his first couple things were weren't home runs, and we see quite a few even startups at least have the ability to pivot. When we look, we're investors in Lyft. But that started off as Zimride, and that wasn't a rocket ship out of the gate. The problem is with an artist, it's harder for an artist to come back than it is for a startup founder to start a new company.
Oh, sorry, like when it's over, that
yeah,
it might just be time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's good news for startups. So let's talk a little bit about Smash Labs. This is a new startup accelerator that Atom Factory has put together. Just started last week, September 14th.
Yeah, we're 1 week in.
So
feels like a year, by the way. The 1 week feels like a year.
So okay, so why then launch an accelerator? It sounds like it's already draining and a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Why
No, I wouldn't say it's draining. It's definitely inspiring having 6 incredible companies. And there's about 20 entrepreneurs in our office. But the idea was to really, when we look at the music industry traditionally, this is an industry that hasn't innovated, hasn't done any innovation internally. So most of the innovation in the music business tends to come from outside companies, be it from a physical element, whether it's the CD, or whether it's companies like Spotify or Apple that have come along and innovated and the industry hasn't been able to really capture that value. So the idea was to really bring in some companies that we felt like could definitely add some value to the music industry, and not just to the music industry, but we have a couple of lifestyle businesses in there as well, and a couple of businesses that we feel like could be disruptive in the media space.
So being in Los Angeles, which is obviously, it's very much an entertainment town, company town, but seeing the startup scene emerge, and like you said, music and tech, there's a clear partnership that can be had there. What is a solution to the issue now where artists are complaining that they're not compensated fairly by streaming services? Spotify is obviously the big one. But there's Apple Music. There's a model that a lot of people who are the creative folks who are making art are not happy with. What do we do about that?
I don't know if it's so when you look at, like, I don't totally agree with. It's funny, we had this conversation earlier. Someone asked me about Taylor Swift removing the music from Spotify and what the thoughts were. And like, where I think Taylor's brilliant, but I think it's sort of a flawed argument because the alternative is piracy, or people already have a free option by going on YouTube and just listening to the music on YouTube. And I think, when you look at services like Spotify, we know the freemium model actually works in terms of being able to convert users. But I do think we have to be patient and move as many people to streaming as possible, because right now we're talking about 50 million users on a streaming service, but when we have 500 million to 1 billion users on the streaming services, then the economics add up at that point.
So artists.
And by the way, the record we've always gotten screwed from record royalties anyway. So when you look at it, the live business and the merchandise business has always been the bigger piece of the pie. And then with record labels, I just think it's more the chickens coming home to roost.
So really, it's a strength in numbers thing. Streaming services aren't a bad model for artists. It's just that more people have to.
It's a scale business.
Yeah.
It really works at scale. And then also, when I know from Spotify came in and did a presentation for us maybe about a couple of months ago, and our clients made a significant amount of income from Spotify. Well, let's rephrase that. The labels made a significant amount of money from Spotify that didn't match up to the artist's royalty statement that the artist actually received. So it's still, so Spotify is paying out a lot of money. It's just not finding its way into the hands of the artist.
So what happens to smaller streaming services that have almost the exact same model as Spotify, but just doesn't have the same amount of users? Are they doomed?
Yeah, I think there's a real issue there. When you have big competitors, because the problem is exclusives in music don't work. It's not a such thing.
Right.
The moment you put something up on a streaming music service, it's open to the world to listen to at that point. So we know exclusives don't work well, and when you look at a service like Tidal, I was excited to see artists having ownership and a platform. The problem is the timing is off, because if they would have been able to launch with a freemium model, then I think they would have had a real chance at survival and actually thriving and being competitive. But because they're stuck in this space where you have to pay, Spotify still has a freemium model, and iTunes has a free. Apple Music has a freemium model as well, at least a trial period.
Trial period, yeah.
It's hard to compete with that, and then also it's hard to compete with that marketing muscle that Apple's now throwing out there. They have hundreds of millions of credit cards on file, and then Spotify's easy to use. So. I think this is going to be interesting, but I don't think this is going to be a marketplace with 6 or 7 competitors at all.
What about the startups that have joined the accelerator, have joined Smash Labs? Are any of them solving any of the problems that we're talking about now?
Yeah, I think in terms of music discovery, Trackfire's building a product right now that's solving music discovery. That's one of those where the problem is when you look at a product, they're doing product hunt for music basically, and when you look at a company like Product Hunt, is actually voted on by the community. But with music discovery, when you look at the independent music scene, is basically the blogs are like gatekeepers, and they kind of dictate what's cool, right?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of buzz on something like SoundCloud, but you still, I think, have to do a lot of navigation yourself.
Yeah, it's very hard. So, just to navigate. And I think the product that they're building kind of allows the community to vote on the cream rising to the top. And you can't cheat it. Another company, Sidestep, is basically solving a problem that we're having with merchandise at venues, and basically capturing the value and the excitement of when you buy a concert ticket, that's when you're most excited about seeing that act.
Right.
So it's giving you the ability to buy your merchandise right there on the spot. You would think something like this already existed, but it's a huge issue for artists when you got 700 people in line at a concert. You got a huge amount of drop off, and so I think they're solving a lot of problems in that space. So, but it's some interesting companies that are coming through.
Before we got out on stage, we mentioned there was a diversity panel here to open up the show here at Disrupt earlier this morning, and I had a question for you. Being in the Los Angeles market, I mean, obviously you're all over the place, but that's where Atom Factory is based, and that's where the accelerator is happening. How much of a difference do you see with the diversity problem? We talk about that a lot in the Bay Area specifically, just because there's so much tech that's concentrated here. It is a problem. A lot of people have ideas of how to solve it, but do you find that the problem is mirrored at all in Los Angeles, or is it just different?
No, I think you know what? I think the way that we're looking at it is so when you look at the overall demographic shift that's happening in America right now, and you look at the next 2 decades, we're going to have this majority minority. And so if you're a company like a Johnson & Johnson, and like a company that's built their business over the last 100 years of marketing your product to an Anglo audience or whatever, your company's not going to be able to survive. Even if you're Mattel and you make Barbie's going to look a lot different over the next 40 years, right? So we're just seeing a huge amount of opportunity for founders who kind of understand what this demographic shift's going to look like, and this shift in consumer behavior, and we're going to throw a lot of capital and be able to give founders who understand this marketplace an opportunity. We actually, the first investment out of our new fund, Cross Culture, is an entrepreneur out of Oakland, Deshaun, who runs a company called Maven that's focused on hair care products for African American women, and is a $9 billion marketplace, but we actually had to explain it to other VCs on behalf of the entrepreneur,
right,
to kind of explain the opportunity for them. And it's a $9 billion market. So, I think it's going to be a lot of opportunities, and if you don't open up the opportunities to entrepreneurs who understand the culture and understand the space, I think Silicon Valley and specifically the VCs here are going to miss out on a huge wave of opportunities.
You realize that, but how many people sort of stare at you blankly if you were going to explain that to them and they're holding a lot of cash?
You know what? Look at China, for instance, right? And you look at what Alibaba has built, Tencent has built, Didi has built. These are local Chinese entrepreneurs who understand the culture of China. So Western companies aren't going to be able to come into a country like China that's very, very specific and understand the cultural and consumer behavior of people there. So when you look at so in America is not that different. It's like, Latinos have a certain culture. Blacks have a certain culture. Like, you know, you look at these subgroups, and if you're not an entrepreneur or a VC that comes out of the space, it's going to be hard to really understand it. And then as we even project out further, the biggest opportunity is going to be in Africa. And over the next, 40, 50 years, Africa is that continent's going to have half of the world's youth living on that continent, and it's going to be entrepreneurs who actually come from that space that know the local market that are going to have the bigger opportunities. So we're just looking at these humongous global demographic shifts and consumer behavioral shifts, and we think it's going to be a lot of financial opportunity there as well.
So what about Silicon Valley then? Will Silicon Valley continue to enjoy its day in the sun that will set, and the money and the activity will move somewhere else?
Not forever. But I do think you have some of the smartest people on the planet that live here and that are making an incredible amount of impact in people's lives every day. So when you have, I think Uber gets a super bad rap about, the company, but when you look at how many jobs that they're providing, mothers and fathers are able to be home for dinner or pick their kids up for school because they have these flexible schedules. And what Airbnb has done, if you have an extra room, all of a sudden it could subsidize income. So I think we have some of the most important companies in the world in Silicon Valley, but I think we have to open it up. So and get rid of the cultural bias that we see happening, and because I think there are going to be financial implications if we don't.
There's Ubers, there's Airbnbs, there's these huge companies. Dropbox is one that you've invested in. Obviously, started a business plan with a great idea that ended up being something that is literally changing people's lives,
Yeah.
not only for their fleet of drivers or people renting out apartments, but those on the other side who are using those services. What's the next big market? Do you wake up ever and say, why isn't anybody doing this? There's a huge need for this. Do you feel like you're waiting for somebody to come along with an idea that just hasn't been tackled yet, that has that kind of potential?
No, you know what? I think a lot of them are obvious, right? So where there's a lot of sleepiness, we look at sleepy categories for sure. And you could see what Beats by Dre was able to do in a sleepy category like headphones.
Sleepy meaning there just wasn't a lot of buzz around.
There's no innovation in the category. Things have been done the same exact
it's just a bunch
thing.
of headphones.
Or there's a lot of bureaucracy, and then so we're investors in Stance socks, for instance, right? And then socks was just this sleepy category,
They're
and
just socks,
all of a sudden Stance comes along, and I think the last round was a $250 million valuation, and they are crushing it right now. Just an incredible company. But when you look at a lot of other sleepy areas, healthcare, for instance, and navigating the healthcare system is just a mess right now. So I think it's going to be a ton of innovation. We're seeing a lot of great things in that space. Of course, fintech, we're seeing a lot of things in the fintech space. One of my favorite companies that we invested in is Tuition.io. And basically, they launched with this idea of being able to manage student debt because it was so complicated. So they help you kind of manage your student debt. But they just recently launched a product where they figured out millennials, they don't care about a 401k. So when they go, and employers are having a lot of retention issues, retaining, millennial talent. So basically, they've built out this product where they match your student loan dollar for dollar the same way they would have matched a 401k dollar for dollar.
Oh.
So yeah, it's fantastic. And that's an area that's completely sleepy.
That's where your debt is anyway.
That's where your debt is. So you don't, millennials aren't looking about, looking out 30, 40 years from now when they retire at 65.
Yeah.
They're looking at, okay, I have, $120,000 in student debt or whatever. So I'm going to stick with that job that's helping me pay that debt down. So, so looking at spaces like that.
Well, we're very excited to continue to watch what comes out of Smash Labs.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, or congrats rather, on all of your success at Atom Factory.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for being with us here
No,
at Disrupt.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Frank Carter, everybody.
Thanks.